The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Crisis Committee looked like someone had taken a United Nations meeting and had fed it through a kaleidoscope designed by someone having a really bad acid trip. Beings from 47 different species sat around a table that defied at least 3 laws of physics and probably violated several noise ordinances just by existing. At the head of the table, Commander Blixen adjusted his collection of medals for the 15th time in 10 minutes. The Centaurian looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a military parade float, complete with enough decorative ribbons to wrap a small moon. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from never having been told no and rarely being right. "Fellow beings," Blixen announced, his voice crackling through the universal translator with all the warmth of a tax audit. "We face the greatest threat in galactic history. The Void Swarm has consumed 17 star systems in the past month. Our best analysts predict total galactic consumption within 6 standard cycles." Ambassador Quillex, who resembled a paranoid grasshopper wearing a business suit, immediately started vibrating his antennae in what the translator helpfully identified as extreme anxiety with undertones of conspiracy theory development. "This is clearly a plot," Quillex chittered, his compound eyes darting around the room like he expected assassins to pop out of the air vents. "Mark my words, someone is behind this. The Void Swarm doesn't just appear randomly, it's too convenient. Too organized, someone's pulling the strings, and I intend to find out who." General Vortak, a being who looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a tank and then given the result anger management issues, just slammed his massive fist on the table hard enough to make several smaller delegates bounce in their chairs. "Conspiracy or not," Vortak growled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer, "the solution is simple. We build bigger weapons. Much bigger weapons so big they have their own zip codes. Then we point them at this Void Swarm and see what happens." "With respect, General," Blixen said in a tone that contained about as much respect as a parking ticket, "but our preliminary scans indicate that conventional weapons have 0 effect on the Void Swarm. It simply absorbs energy and grows stronger. Then we use unconventional weapons," Vortak replied, as if this solved everything. "I'm talking about weaponized black holes, reality-inverting missiles, that sort of thing." In the corner of the room, completely ignored by the ongoing argument, Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly sipping coffee from a mug that read Galaxy's okayest human. He looked exactly like what he was, a guy who'd rather be literally anywhere else, doing literally anything else, including his taxes, or assembling furniture from that Swedish company with the unpronounceable names. Jake had the appearance of someone who'd stopped being impressed by galactic politics around the same time he'd stopped believing that some assembly required meant only takes 5–10 minutes. His uniform was regulation, but worn with the casual indifference of a man who'd figured out that the universe was mostly held together by good intentions and duct tape. The debate raged on for another hour, covering topics ranging from strategic withdrawal protocols to diplomatic immunity evacuation procedures. Several committees were formed to create other committees, which would then establish subcommittees to determine if they needed additional committees. Suddenly, the room's main communication array lit up with incoming priority alerts. Commander Blixen's aide, a nervous creature that looked like a ferret having an existential crisis, scurried over and whispered something that made all of Blixen's medals rattle. "Gentle beings," Blixen announced, his voice climbing several octaves. "I've just received word that 3 more systems have vanished. The Kepler sector, the Andromeda armed colonies, and," he paused dramatically, "the Centaurian vacation resort system." The room erupted in panic. Several delegates immediately started making calls to their evacuation services. Others began drafting resignation letters. Ambassador Quillex started muttering something about this being exactly what he'd expected all along. Through it all, Jake continued drinking his coffee, occasionally checking his watch and wondering if the cafeteria was still serving those little sandwiches with the weird alien cheese that actually wasn't terrible. The panic in the room reached fever pitch as more reports streamed in. Systems weren't just disappearing anymore, they were vanishing faster than anyone could track. The Void Swarm had apparently decided that subtle was overrated and had shifted into what could only be described as aggressive consumption mode. Commander Blixen tried to restore order by banging his ceremonial gavel, which made a sound like a dying space whale. Please, fellow beings, we must maintain composure. We need solutions, not hysteria. I propose we form an emergency response committee, suggested Delegate Flurble, a blob-like creature whose species communicated primarily through color changes. Currently, Flurble was cycling through what the translator helpfully identified as panic rainbow with anxiety undertones. Excellent idea, Blixen replied. We'll need a subcommittee to determine the committee's membership, of course, and another committee to establish the subcommittee's authority parameters, added Ambassador Quillex, who had apparently decided that if the galaxy was ending, it should at least end with proper bureaucratic procedure. General Vortak stood up, his chair making protesting sounds that suggested it had never been designed for someone of his particular mass and aggressive tendencies. While you're all forming committees to form committees, I'm going to start requisitioning planet crackers. If we can't stop this thing, we'll make sure it gets indigestion. General, please, Blixen said, adjusting his medals nervously. We can't simply blow up everything in the Void Swarm's path. That would be genocide on an unprecedented scale. It's not genocide if there's nobody left to prosecute us, Vortak replied with the kind of logic that explained why his species had never been invited to philosophy conferences. The argument continued for another 30 minutes, covering increasingly absurd topics like preemptive surrender protocols and strategic existential denial. Jake finished his coffee and was considering getting another cup when he noticed that several delegates were staring at him. Captain Morrison, Commander Blixen said suddenly, you've been remarkably quiet during these proceedings. Surely Earth has some sort of contingency plan for galactic-level extinction events. Jake looked up from his empty mug and blinked slowly, the way people do when they've been asked to solve calculus problems at a dinner party. Contingency plan? For what? The thing eating star systems? Yes, the Void Swarm, Blixen said impatiently. Certainly your species has protocols for such scenarios. Jake scratched his head and looked around the room at 46 different species all staring at him expectantly. Well, no, not really. We've been kind of busy with other stuff. You know, climate change, figuring out faster than light pizza delivery, that ongoing debate about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, the usual existential stuff. The room went dead silent. Ambassador Quillex's color patterns shifted to what the translator identified as shocked disbelief mixed with vindicated paranoia. You mean to tell me, Commander Blixen said slowly, that Earth, a planet that has somehow managed to survive first contact, nuclear weapons, and reality television, has no plan for dealing with cosmic-level threats? Look, Jake said, setting down his mug and finally giving the room his full attention. It's not that we don't have plans. It's just that our plans usually involve a lot more improvisation and a lot less committee formation. Plus, this Void Swarm thing only started, what? A month ago. We were going to get around to thinking about it after we finished arguing about the pizza thing. This is outrageous, Blixen sputtered, his medals jangling like wind chimes in a hurricane. How can a species with no crisis management protocols possibly contribute to solving this problem? Perhaps, Ambassador Quillex suggested, his antennae twitching with barely contained smugness, the primitive humans should leave this matter to more advanced civilizations. Clearly, this is beyond their understanding. Jake felt something shift in his expression. The same thing that happened when customer service representatives told him that his legitimate complaint wasn't their problem, or when people told him that the thing he'd just fixed couldn't possibly work the way he'd fixed it. You know what? Jake said, standing up slowly and fixing the entire assembly with the kind of look that had historically preceded very bad decisions by very determined humans. Fine. I'll handle it. The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop, if pins made any sound when dropped in the vacuum of space, which they don't. But the metaphor still applied. Commander Blixen's medals stopped jangling. General Vortak, who had been reaching for his weapon requisition forms, froze mid-reach. Ambassador Quillex's color patterns shifted to what the translator could only describe as oh no, oh no, oh no, why did this happen exactly as I predicted it would? Several delegates began backing toward the exits. Others started making frantic calls to their insurance companies. One species that communicated through interpretive dance immediately began what could only be described as the dance of impending doom with freestyle panic movements. Did, Commander Blixen whispered. Did the human just say he would handle it? Yes, Ambassador Quillex replied, his voice carrying the tone of someone watching a historical catastrophe unfold in real time. Yes, he did. May whatever deities you worship have mercy on us all. Words spread across the galaxy faster than a celebrity scandal in a gossip magazine. The phrase "a human said he'd handle it" became the most searched term on the Galactic Information Network, overtaking previous favorites like cheap spaceship insurance and how to tell if your AI is plotting against you. Stock markets across 17 different star systems crashed simultaneously. The Galactic Emergency Broadcast System activated for the first time in 3 centuries, sending out automated warnings that roughly translated to seek shelter immediately and maybe consider updating your will. On the planet Xerion Prime, the entire government declared a 3-day weekend and suggested that citizens spend time with their families. The Crystalline Collective began transmitting their entire cultural database to distant galaxies, just in case. Several minor species started evolutionary crash courses, hoping to develop useful survival traits in the next few days. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the galaxy-wide panic attack he'd triggered, Jake sat in his modest quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel, making what could generously be called preparations for dealing with the Void Swarm. His first order of business had been requesting a meeting with the quartermaster, a conversation that had gone approximately as well as expected. "Let me get this straight," Quartermaster Jenkins said, looking at Jake's requisition list like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. "You want coffee makers, duct tape, a boombox from the 1980s, hot sauce and—" He squinted at the list. "Something called that weird beef jerky from the place near the spaceport that probably isn't entirely legal." "That's the emergency supplies," Jake confirmed. "I also need personnel files for every human in the fleet who's been marked as problematic, unconventional, or do not assign to important missions." Jenkins stared at him for a long moment. "Sir, with respect, are you having some kind of breakdown? Because the counseling department has this new relaxation program with virtual beaches and simulated margaritas." "No breakdown," Jake said cheerfully. "I'm just putting together a team to save the galaxy. Standard procedure, really." Within 6 hours, Jake had assembled what could charitably be called a crew, and what would more accurately be described as a collection of humans who had turned making bad decisions into an art form. Engineer Murphy was the first to report for duty, showing up with a toolkit that violated several safety regulations and possibly a few laws of physics. Murphy operated on the principle that anything could be fixed with enough determination and creative application of percussive maintenance. His service record included the phrases "innovative problem-solving," "disregard for conventional procedures," and "please stop him from doing that thing with the plasma conduits." "So, Skipper," Murphy said, already pulling apart a perfectly functional communication device just to see how it worked, "I hear we're going up against some kind of cosmic horror that eats star systems for breakfast." "That's the general idea," Jake confirmed. "Any thoughts on how to approach something like that?" Murphy grinned in a way that had historically preceded insurance claims. "Well, if it eats energy, maybe we feed it something that disagrees with it. You know, like cosmic indigestion. I've got some ideas about weaponized uncertainty principles and modified reality anchors." "I understood about half of those words, but you sound confident, so we'll go with that." Next to arrive was pilot Rosa Crash Delgado, who had earned her nickname through a combination of exceptional flying skills and a complete inability to land anything without at least minor property damage. She had never met a flight manual she couldn't ignore or a safety protocol she couldn't improve upon through creative interpretation. "Captain," Rosa said, saluting with the casual indifference of someone who had never quite figured out military protocol and had decided to wing it. "I hear we're taking a trip to see something that makes black holes look like particularly friendly house pets." "Something like that," Jake agreed. "Think you can get us there in one piece?" "Define one piece," Rosa replied. "Because I can definitely get us there, and most of us will probably arrive with all our original parts. I make no promises about the ship, though. Fair warning, I've been experimenting with some modifications to the engine systems that technically violate several principles of thermodynamics. As long as we get there, Jake said, making a mental note to update his insurance policy. The final member of the team was Science Officer Dr. Kim, whose approach to scientific method could best be described as enthusiastic and worst described as please keep her away from anything that could potentially explode. Dr. Kim arrived carrying what appeared to be a modified sensor array that was humming ominously and occasionally sparking in colors that probably didn't exist in normal space-time. "Captain Morrison," she said, adjusting her safety goggles, "I've been analyzing the preliminary data on this void swarm, and I have to say, it's absolutely fascinating. The energy readings are completely unprecedented, the spatial distortions are magnificent. The way it seems to exist partially outside our dimensional framework is just beautiful." "That's great, Doc," Jake said. "Any ideas on how to stop it?" "Stop it?" Dr. Kim looked genuinely confused. "Why would we want to stop it?" "I was hoping we could study it up close, maybe take some samples. Do you think it would mind if we poked it a little bit?" Jake looked at his assembled team, an engineer who treated physics like a suggestion, a pilot who had never successfully completed a landing that didn't involve some form of structural damage, and a scientist who wanted to poke the galaxy's greatest threat with a stick to see what would happen. "You know what?" he said finally. "This might actually work." The human ship questionable decision approached the void swarm with all the stealth and tactical sophistication of a marching band having an argument with a construction crew. This was partly because Rosa had decided that the traditional approach vectors were boring, and had instead chosen a flight path that looked like it had been drawn by someone having a seizure while riding a roller coaster. From their monitoring stations approximately 17 star systems away, a collection of alien military observers watched in horror as the humans did everything wrong according to every tactical manual ever written. "They're flying directly toward it," Commander Blixen reported, his voice climbing several octaves as he watched the tactical display. "No reconnaissance drones, no advanced scouting, no preliminary energy sweeps. They're just going straight at the thing that eats star systems for fun." "It's worse than that," General Vortak added, consulting his instruments with the expression of someone watching a traffic accident in slow motion. "They're broadcasting electromagnetic radiation at maximum power, some kind of primitive audio transmission." Ambassador Quillex activated his universal translator and immediately wished he hadn't. "It appears to be what humans call classic rock. The primary song seems to be titled Don't Stop Me Now. I believe this is what they call irony." Aboard the questionable decision, the crew was having what could generously be called a mission briefing and what would more accurately be described as a combination improvisation session and a snack planning meeting. "Okay, people," Jake announced over the ship's intercom, which Murphy had modified to also function as a coffee maker for reasons that made sense to him. "We're approaching the void swarm in about 30 minutes. Anyone have any brilliant insights about what we're dealing with?" Dr. Kim's voice crackled through the comm system with barely contained excitement. "Captain, I've been analyzing the sensor readings, and I think I've figured out what we're dealing with. The good news is, it's not actually malevolent." "Define not malevolent," Rosa called from the pilot's seat, where she was simultaneously flying the ship, eating a sandwich, and trying to figure out why one of her engine modifications was making a sound like a whale with hiccups. "Well," Dr. Kim continued, "based on the energy patterns and consumption behavior, I don't think it's trying to destroy anything. The spatial distortions suggest it's actually trying to preserve the systems it encounters. It's more like..." She paused, clearly searching for the right analogy. "Like it's a really big, really confused creature that's been sleepwalking and accidentally eating things it mistakes for food." Murphy's voice joined the conversation, accompanied by the sound of something being enthusiastically dismantled. "So you're saying this galaxy-eating horror is basically having a case of cosmic sleep munchies?" "That's actually not a terrible way to put it," Dr. Kim admitted. "The bioenergy readings suggest it's some kind of massive life form that's been dormant for possibly millions of years. Something woke it up, and now it's wandering around in a confused state, consuming anything that looks like it might be food." Jake considered this information while staring out the view screen at what looked like a particularly aggressive nebula that someone had taught to hate everything in the universe. So we're dealing with a cosmic entity that's essentially the galactic equivalent of someone raiding the refrigerator at 3 in the morning. With the ability to accidentally consume entire star systems. Yes, Dr. Kim confirmed cheerfully. Jake said. You know, that actually makes this a lot simpler. Rosa's voice came over the intercom with the tone of someone who had just noticed something important. Captain? We've got visual contact with the Void Swarm, and I've got to say, it's bigger than the sensor reading suggested. A lot bigger. Like holy crap, that's actually a living thing bigger. Jake looked out the view screen and had to admit that Rosa had a point. The Void Swarm wasn't so much a swarm as it was a single massive creature that seemed to exist in about 7 dimensions simultaneously. It looked like someone had crossed a whale with a nebula and then given the result existential confusion and an eating disorder. It's beautiful, Dr. Kim whispered over the con. Look at the way the space-time distortions ripple around its feeding appendages. The bioluminescent patterns are absolutely gorgeous. It's also heading straight for the Kepler sector, Murphy pointed out. Population about 40 billion, plus that new artificial intelligence collective that just achieved sentience last week. Jake watched the massive creature drift through space with the casual indifference of something that had never needed to worry about things like other life forms or it not accidentally consuming civilizations. It moved with the slow, dreamy motions of something that was definitely not fully awake. Okay, Jake said finally. New plan. Rosa, can you get us close enough to get its attention without getting eaten? Define without getting eaten, Rosa replied, already adjusting their trajectory in ways that made the ship's structural integrity warnings start playing what sounded like a funeral march. Dr. Kim, what would it take to wake this thing up properly? You know, make it realize it's not supposed to be eating inhabited star systems. Well, Dr. Kim said thoughtfully, based on the bio readings, it seems to be operating on some kind of primitive hunger response. If we could provide it with appropriate nutrition and maybe some sensory stimulation to help it achieve full consciousness. And I could rig up some kind of feeding apparatus, Murphy added, his voice accompanied by sounds that suggested he was already building something that would either save the galaxy or violate several fundamental laws of physics. We've got those emergency nutrient paste supplies, and I bet I could modify the cargo bay to work as a delivery system. So our plan, Jake said slowly, is to wake up a cosmic entity by feeding it properly and maybe playing some music to help it feel better. When you put it like that, Rosa said, it sounds almost reasonable, for us anyway. Jake looked out at the massive creature again, watching as it drifted toward another populated system with the oblivious determination of someone sleepwalking toward the refrigerator. You know what? He said. I've had worse plans. Let's go make friends with a cosmic horror. What happened next would go down in galactic history as either the most ridiculous diplomatic contact ever recorded or the most effective crisis resolution in the history of interstellar relations, depending on who was writing the history books. The questionable decision approached the cosmic entity with all the subtlety of a dinner bell, at broadcasting classic rock at maximum volume while Murphy's hastily constructed feeding apparatus deployed from the cargo bay. The device looked like someone had crossed an industrial coffee maker with a particle accelerator and then added racing stripes for no apparent reason. Feeding system is online, Murphy reported, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just successfully violated several engineering principles and was quite proud of it. I've modified our entire stock of emergency nutrient paste to match the bioenergy signatures Dr. Kim detected. Fair warning, it smells like a combination of artificial banana and existential dread. The creature is responding to our approach, Dr. Kim announced, her instruments making excited beeping sounds that probably meant something important. Bio readings are spiking. I think it's starting to wake up properly. Rosa, meanwhile, was flying the ship in patterns that could charitably be described as interpretive and would more accurately be called how to give a cosmic entity motion sickness. But it's turning toward us, she reported, and by turning, I mean rearranging local space-time to face our general direction. The good news is, we're not being digested. The bad news is, I think it's curious about us, and when something that big gets curious, things tend to get interesting. From their distant monitoring positions, Van. Deal. Farrell. The assembled alien fleets watched in fascination and terror as the human ship began what appeared to be an elaborate feeding ritual with the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Are they trying to feed it? Commander Blixen whispered, his voice carrying the tone of someone watching a particularly elaborate form of suicide. It appears so, General Vortak confirmed, and unless my sensors are malfunctioning, the void swarm is responding positively. Energy readings are stabilizing. The spatial distortions are becoming less aggressive. Ambassador Quillex had given up trying to understand what was happening and had instead started documenting everything for what he was sure would become the galaxy's most important historical record. The day the humans fed a cosmic horror and somehow made it work. Aboard the questionable decision, Dr. Kim was practically vibrating with excitement as her instruments registered changes in the creature's biopatterns. "Captain, this is incredible," she reported. "The entity is achieving full consciousness for the first time in possibly millions of years. The feeding is helping, but I think the music is actually more important. The rhythmic patterns seem to be providing some kind of neurological stimulation." "So we're basically giving a cosmic entity breakfast and a wake-up playlist?" Jake asked. That's surprisingly accurate," Dr. Kim admitted. The creature, now properly fed and gradually awakening, began to exhibit behaviors that were significantly less world-ending horror and significantly more confused cosmic wail. It started by examining the human ship with what could only be described as gentle curiosity, but using appendages that existed in dimensions humans didn't have names for to carefully probe the vessel's energy patterns. Then, in a display that caused several monitoring aliens to faint, it began to sing. The song, if it could be called that, resonated through space-time itself. It was hauntingly beautiful, like whale song performed by a choir of galaxies, and it carried with it something that made every listening being feel simultaneously insignificant and deeply connected to the universe. "It's trying to communicate," Dr. Kim said, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the cosmic melody. "The song contains information. It's apologizing for the confusion, for the accidental consumption of inhabited systems." As if responding to her understanding, the creature began to do something that defied every law of physics the observers thought they understood. The consumed star systems began to reappear, emerging from what appeared to be extra-dimensional storage spaces within the entity's body. It never destroyed them, Dr. Kim realized. It was trying to protect them. The consumption process was actually a preservation mechanism. It thought it was saving them from some kind of threat. One by one, 17 star systems flickered back into existence, their planets and inhabitants completely unharmed but understandably confused about their brief vacation in a cosmic entity's digestive system. The creature, now fully awake and properly fed, began to move with purpose rather than aimless wandering. Its song changed, becoming something that conveyed gratitude and what might have been the cosmic equivalent of embarrassment. "I think it's trying to say thank you," Rosa said, watching as the massive being gently nudged their ship in what was probably intended as an affectionate gesture and only resulted in minor structural damage. Murphy's feeding apparatus had apparently been such a success that the creature was now following them like a cosmic puppy, occasionally bumping into asteroids with the enthusiasm of something that had just discovered the joy of being properly awake. "Dr. Kim," Jake said, "please tell me you're getting all of this on record. Because I have a feeling nobody's going to believe us when we file our mission report." "Already on it, Captain," Dr. Kim replied. "I'm also detecting something else. The creature isn't alone. Its biosong is being answered from distant parts of the galaxy. I think there are others of its species, and they're waking up too." "More of them?" Jake asked. "But these ones," Dr. Kim continued, "these ones are waking up properly, with full consciousness, because our friend here is teaching them what it learned from us. It's sharing the experience of proper awakening, of music and food and friendship. The cosmic entity gave what might have been the universe's largest equivalent of a contented sigh, then began to move away from the populated sectors of the galaxy, heading toward the cosmic deep, where others of its kind were awakening to consciousness for the first time in eons. Before it left, it did something that would puzzle xenobiologists for generations. It gently deposited a small, crystalline structure near their ship. The crystal pulsed with the same bioenergy as the creature itself. "I think," Dr. Kim said softly, "I think it just gave us a way to call for help, and in case something like this happens again." As the cosmic entity disappeared into the deep reaches of space, its song fading to a gentle melody that seemed to promise peaceful dreams and proper meals, Jake looked around at his crew and realized that they had just accomplished something that would probably result in either medals or psychiatric evaluations. "Well," he said finally, "that went better than expected." The aftermath of what historians would eventually call the Great Feeding was both immediate and far-reaching. Within hours of the cosmic entity's departure, the Galactic Crisis Committee reconvened in emergency session, this time with significantly more alcohol and considerably fewer pompous speeches. Commander Blixen sat at the head of the table, his collection of medals looking somehow less impressive after witnessing humans resolve a galactic crisis with snack foods and classic rock. His official report lay before him, a document that he'd rewritten 17 times and still couldn't make sound like anything other than the ravings of someone who'd been hit by cosmic radiation. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various configurations," he began, his voice carrying the tired tone of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered by recent events, "that we are here to discuss the resolution of the Void Swarm crisis and the implications of how it was resolved." Ambassador Quillex raised a trembling appendage. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" "Granted. Granted. What the hell just happened?" The question hung in the air like a particularly awkward silence at a diplomatic dinner party. Several delegates nodded in agreement, while others simply stared at their notes as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. General Vortak, who had spent the last several hours reviewing tactical footage and questioning his life choices, cleared his throat. "If I may, Commander, I believe what happened was that the humans employed what they call thinking outside the box to resolve a crisis that our conventional approaches were completely inadequate to address. They fed it," Delegate Flurble added, his color patterns cycling through what the translator identified as bewildered admiration with undertones of existential confusion. "They fed a cosmic horror and made friends with it. How do we even file that under existing protocols?" Commander Blixen looked down at his preliminary report, which currently read, "Crisis resolved through application of nutrient paste, audio entertainment, and human stubbornness. Recommend review of all existing emergency protocols." It wasn't his best work, but it was accurate. "The ramifications extend beyond just this incident," he said finally. "Our sensors are detecting awakening activity throughout the galaxy. Dr. Kim's analysis suggests that there are possibly hundreds of these entities, all of them now achieving proper consciousness thanks to the educational broadcast from the first one." "Are we talking about a potential threat multiplication?" asked the delegate from the Cygnian Collective, whose species communicated through complex mathematical equations and was currently expressing what translated to mild panic with exponential concern factors. "Actually, no," came a voice from the room's communication system. Dr. Kim's image appeared on the main screen, looking significantly more cheerful than anyone else in the room. "Based on our continued monitoring, the awakened entities are actually serving a beneficial function. They're part of a cosmic ecosystem that maintains galactic stability. Think of them as cosmic gardeners, keeping space-time healthy and preventing the kind of dimensional instabilities that could collapse entire galactic clusters." "So you're telling us," Ambassador Quillex said slowly, "that the galaxy's greatest threat was actually its maintenance crew, and they were just confused because they'd been asleep for too long?" "That's surprisingly accurate," Dr. Kim confirmed. "And now that they're properly awake and fed, they're going back to their regular jobs. We've essentially solved a galactic infrastructure crisis that we didn't even know we had." The room fell silent as the assembled delegates processed this information. Several species had built their entire military doctrines around defending against cosmic threats, and now they were being told that the biggest threat had actually been trying to help all along. "There's more," Dr. Kim continued. "The crystal the entity gave us? It's not just a communication device, it's a manual. A guide to understanding and cooperating with cosmic-level life forms. We've basically been given the universe's instruction booklet." Commander Blixen rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building that would probably last for several decades. "Dr. Kim, what you're describing suggests that human problem-solving methods may be uniquely effective for dealing with unusual situations." "Well, Doctor," Kim said, with a grin that was visible even through the communication system, "Captain Morrison is already reviewing reports of some time-traveling space pirates that have been causing trouble in the Outer Rim. He mentioned something about taking a look at it tomorrow if nobody else wanted to handle it." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Half the delegates began gathering their belongings, while the other half started making frantic calls to their respective governments. General Vortak knocked over his chair in his haste to leave, muttering something about requisitioning a very long vacation to a very distant galaxy. Ambassador Quillex had turned a color that the translator could only identify as vindicated terror. "This is exactly what I've been warning about," he said to nobody in particular. "First they solved one crisis, then another, and before you know it, they're restructuring the fundamental nature of galactic civilization through sheer bloody-minded determination." Commander Blixen called for order, but it was too late. The assembled delegates were already implementing what would become known as the Morrison Protocol, a galaxy-wide early warning system designed to alert all member species whenever a human expressed willingness to handle a situation. The official policy, ratified 3 days later, read, "Under no circumstances should any member species, for any reason, suggest that human personnel handle a crisis situation unless said species is prepared for the fundamental laws of physics to be treated as polite suggestions and for the resolution to involve methods that cannot be adequately described in any existing language." Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his quarters, feet up on his desk, planning his well-deserved vacation to the beach resort on Kepler 442 billion. He was completely unaware that his casual approach to problem-solving had fundamentally altered galactic civilization's understanding of crisis management, cosmic entities, and the terrifying efficiency of human stubbornness. His peaceful planning was interrupted by his communication system, chiming with an incoming priority message. The caller ID simply read Galactic Emergency Services. Jake looked at the blinking light for a moment, then at his vacation brochures, then back at the light. He sighed, picked up the communicator, and said the words that would send another wave of panic across 17 star systems. "Yeah, sure, I can take a look at that tomorrow." Somewhere in the depths of space, a cosmic entity that had just learned the joy of being properly fed and fully conscious felt a strange sense of anticipation. It was joined by dozens of its newly awakened kin, all of them humming a melody that sounded suspiciously like classic rock and wondering what interesting things the humans would teach them next. The galaxy, for better or worse, had learned an important lesson. When humans say they'll handle something, the universe itself holds its breath and waits to see what happens next. And based on recent evidence, what happens next is usually both completely impossible and surprisingly effective. Jake Morrison, blissfully unaware that his name had become synonymous with cosmic-scale problem-solving through applied stubbornness, finished his coffee and started reading about time-traveling space pirates with the same casual interest most people reserved for crossword puzzles. After all, how hard could it be?